Welcome back to another exciting edition of the Pointless Exercise Podcast. We're going to talk about the Cubs today with a first-time guest.
Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike Big Wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
This episode is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Didn't file with TurboTax last year? That's in the past. Now, Taxes is getting the TurboTax app and filing your own taxes for free if you didn't file with them last year. File by February 18th. All tax forms, all 100% free. Now, this is Taxes. Intuit TurboTax. New filers and filers who didn't use TurboTax last year only must start and file your own taxes in-app by February 18th. Excludes TurboTax Live. Full terms at TurboTax.com.
When it comes to towing, seeing is believing. That's why Chevy Truck's advanced camera technology offers up to 8 available cameras for 14 unique views, so you can focus on the view that really matters. Chevrolet, together let's drive. Learn more about Chevy Trucks at Chevy.com. Safety or driver assistance features are no substitute for the driver's responsibility to operate the vehicle in a safe manner. Read the Vehicle Owner's Manual for important feature limitations and information.
And would you consider
long-time
us...
listener.
Are you? That's great. Would you consider us former colleagues?
Yeah, I would say former teammates.
I probably should finish introducing
during the Wild West days of the Athletic,
when they would hire anybody, including me. Patrick Mooney. I can't read my own handwriting. Senior writer of the Athletic. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Nobody knows what their titles are there. I don't know what mine was. Head assistant moron. I think that's what I was. How many years? Is this your 4th year?
Completing my 5th year at the Athletic.
Oh, so you made it. So what happens there, people don't know this, after your 4th year, they give you a raise, and then when they go to process your paperwork, they're like, oh, no, we're not signing anymore. He has to go. That's what happened to me. John got me a raise, and they said, oh, no, we're not extending contracts to freelancers anymore, and his is over, so he can leave. So that's how I got the boot.
I do think that was true across the board. That was not like a anti-Discipio decision. It was a company-wide.
That's what I was told. And Bruce Miles was doing freelance stuff, and he couldn't do it anymore either.
Yeah, and John always said your stuff, not surprisingly, did well. It had a built-in audience.
I'm still waiting to be asked back.
Tapped into.
I mean, I know I have this media behemoth here at Pointless Exercise, but I could always be lured back. You guys still have your podcast?
Yeah, we're kind of in off-season hibernation mode until probably the winter meetings. Maybe you can come on our show.
Well,
Rick Havoc, depending on how this goes.
I mean, I'd be more than happy to come on. At the time when you formed the podcast, there were 3 people at the Athletic writing about the Cubs, and then you started a 3-person podcast about the Cubs, and one of us wasn't on the podcast. So, not that I'm bitter about that or anything.
Yeah. As Carlos Villanueva used to say, I just work here. I mean, that would be a Greenberg. That's something you can take up with Greenberg on Twitter. He's
that's all we're going to talk about the next time I have him on the podcast.
Recurring guest, John Greenberg.
He is, I think. Next time he's on, I think he'll be the most the guest who isn't a co-host who's been on this the most. We can put that on his resume, his LinkedIn page. That'll be exciting for him.
There you go.
All right, the most important question I'm going to ask you is: have you ever been in the pitch lab?
No, I've peered into it. Yeah. There was a funny. It was actually really funny when Sahadev kind of first wrote about it several years ago. Someone was like, "How do you even know about it? What are you talking about?" And at the time, at the Sloan Park practice facilities, there's kind of like this warehouse area in the middle of it. And there was literally a printed out sign that said pitch lab here with a big red arrow pointing into it. So it was very Cub communication breakdown. I think they have this like secretive thing, and literally it's the path where the media walks from kind of the clubhouse area to where the mounds are, where you see all the B-roll of pitchers throwing spring training. And literally right in the middle of that, there was this sign in all capital letters, pitch lab here with a big red arrow. So that their super top secret facility was well advertised.
What I picture, remember the montage scene in Rocky 4, where Drago is in the high tech. He's on the. Yeah. They've got him like hooked up to all the monitors and stuff, and they're pumping him full of steroids, and then Stallone is over there like in a barn in Russia, with an ox cart. I'm not sure if the pitch lab is the ox cart or the fancy treadmill, but we know they've committed money. They have all the magic cameras. They've got the best ones you could possibly get, and that's and one of the things I love is how quick they are to take credit for any improvement of pitch. They immediately apply any improvement to the pitch lab. Well, that guy, we sucked, but then we got him in the pitch lab and we fixed everything, and now look at him.
Yeah, I will say I think they did a good job this year of adapting some of their messaging and programming into more like simple terms and applying more common sense to some of their throwing programs and things like that, because they were pointing to these successes while, Braylon didn't pitch for 2 years. They had a bunch of their top prospects who just did not pitch at all. And I do think there were some adjustments made there. I think there was a lot of awareness of some of those issues, and I do think they bridged some of those gaps, because one of these years it's not going to work with the bullpen, but I do think they've done a pretty solid job with that, of like, because things didn't bottom out this year at the trade deadline in a way that I almost certainly thought it would. Not to like throw a parade for, what is it, the 5th best record in the National League? Is that what you like to
when you go to the banner raising
okay.
in April, you'll see the 5th best record in the National League after the All-Star break.
Okay.
Yeah. In a league where 7 teams were trying to win, the Cubs had the 5th best record in the second half, mostly because they'd already played all the good teams in the first half. But we're not going to talk about that. My 2 favorite pitch lab things were how excited they were for, you should see what we did to Tommy Nance. We fixed this guy. It's amazing. And he came up, and then they outlawed sticky stuff, and Tommy had to leave. And then when they traded for Hayden Wesneski, and they sent him to Iowa, and I think they only sent him there. They wanted to kill a couple of weeks, so when he came up and he pitched, they could say, well, we fixed him in the pitch lab. I was like, well, no, he was pretty. I thought that's why you traded for him. Isn't he supposed to be good?
Yeah, I think Wesneski, if he does wind up being pretty good, and he looked pretty good. He at least had he had some charisma on the mound, I would say. Like, that's not really something the IB computer system probably registers, but he definitely thinks he's like awesome.
Yeah, he does.
I do think there's something to that. Like, he didn't look scared. And I think coming up with the Yankees in New York, like being around that, I think is a good kind of training ground. The Yankees have done a pretty good job of at least finding like some useful pitchers over the years.
Well, Kaki's good. If you're good, fans like to see that, and I do think it certainly has to help to have confidence when you're pitching, as opposed to
no doubt.
I don't know. Let's see what I'm gonna throw this. Let's see what happens.
Yeah,
I have no idea.
Now waiting for the high-speed motion capture camera to tell you what you did wrong. Of just having the confidence to go out there and throw your best stuff and see what happens. Like, I was impressed. I thought he did a nice job down the stretch.
Yeah, he did. So Jose Abreu signed with the Astros, much to Bruce Levine's chagrin. Were the Cubs actually talking to Jose at all? Ken Rosenthal kind of put a thing in where it sounds like they at least dipped their toe in, so that Bruce could at least say, "See, I told you they were trying to sign him." I didn't. You couldn't convince me of a fit, especially not at 3 years.
No, not at 3. I mean, they were definitely involved and had him on their radar and saw like a really good fit. But
so he was on. They had
to look at lots of different possibilities because they knew deep down that they were not going to go all out to sign this guy. And the Astros are kind of an interesting operation now to see Jeff Bagwell talking about this game's played by humans, not computers. Like they'll be a really interesting team to watch to see what they do, because it's probably going to be like the total opposite of what the Cubs do.
Yeah. But so what you're saying is that sometime on that was Monday that came out that he signed, Carter had to go into a conference room and at least erase Abreu's name off of a whiteboard somewhere. Now, we didn't get him. All right.
Maybe there's someone on the data entry on their IV system that updates it. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, they met with Trey Mancini's agent during GM meetings. They obviously met with they went to the Boris Corp suite in Vegas, and they got Josh Bell. They want to upgrade at first base is an obvious area, but I don't think this offseason will be judged on what they do at first base. I mean, there's just so many holes to fill that it's like, getting fixated on one guy at one non-glamorous defensive position or even a totally offensive position as a part-time DH is not really where their heads are at. And I think they're kind of, how do I phrase intelligent spending? They're just not the team that's going to be just jumping out there. Maybe I'll be proven wrong by the time you post this podcast, but they're very much in, they want deals on their terms and whatever surplus value they can capture in each one. And I do think they'll spend a lot of money in the aggregate. I think they'll sign a bunch of interesting guys. I just don't know how Cubs fans will respond if none of those guys play shortstop, because it's really set up, after last year, it's like, oh, it's the lockout. We're still kind of getting out of the 2016, the shadows of 2016. And now it's like a whole nother spectacular class of free agent shortstops at like the most important position at a time when the rules are changing that will prioritize athleticism up the middle. Like if they don't come away with one of them, I think they could still have a successful offseason, but just the optics will be terrible. It's gonna like cast a shadow over the start of spring training, and I don't think they're gonna give themselves much margin for error. They don't.
So if you don't sign a first baseman, I know a lot of rules. I was an official scorer for the Beloit Snappers one year, but could you put a bucket on first base, and if Nico could just throw the ball into the bucket, would the runner be out? Because I think you have to actually have a human there, right? So they have to get somebody.
Yeah, I do think we were kind of spoiled by Rizzo's defense over the years of just kind of he got so good at that. And whether it was like standing right next to the batter when he was trying to bunt, or when Javi would make a crazy throw and like Rizzo would kind of look at him, or like when Willson would throw a ball 100 miles an hour on a bunt and he'd like stare down Willson like,
I don't know what was from 40 feet away.
There were lots of like funny little things like that in that infield, or like Rizzo yelling at Javi like don't drop it during some of those playoff games. Like there's a lot going on there that Rizzo, while not like the traditional like leader you'd want, there's a lot of good things he brought to the table that weren't just home runs and that weren't like standing up and giving huge speeches. He just kind of did his own thing in a way that like worked for that group at that time.
Yeah, and I think that's an important. I think Cub fans think Rizzo was like, it was like the locker room, the guy who went around and fired guys up and yelled at guys. You can be a leader in a lot of different ways, and that's not his form of leadership. And the worst thing you can do is if you're not that guy, try to act like that guy. And it doesn't sound like he ever did. He was just him. And it's like, this works.
Yeah, I think he wanted some of that. I just think his personality wasn't. And look, like, there's no like perfect play. I mean, the guy would, visit cancer wards at hospitals downtown like almost every week, like whenever the Cubs were in town. And it was good that he brought that looseness, but like, yeah, he was much more inclined to like make fun of his teammates and like keep it loose than like, challenge them in a way, that Ross or maybe Hayward would.
Yeah. Speaking of Jason Hayward, so the Cubs, he's going to be paid by the Cubs to not play this year. Is anybody going to pay him to play, do you think?
He wanted to see what's out there, and I think, there could be, a team or two where that would make sense. It's not going to happen like in San Diego next week during the winter meetings, but I don't know. I mean, people just rave about him, and like he does bring something. He can play defense. I mean, if you're paying him basically nothing, and it's like the right team, the right situation, like I don't know. He's a guy I think you'd like to have on your team in a very like specific role, like, and he's earned, a lot of credibility. That there are fewer people like that at running front offices now, but there's a handful out there that would like be intrigued by what Jason could bring and could see the value, the example he sets, things like that.
If you need a ground ball, a 3-hop grounder to second, there is nobody in the league better than Jason Hayward. So if that situation ever calls for it, you're like, oh, we've got the guy. All right, J-Hay, go in. Watch this. Yeah, he seems like a hell of a guy. And yeah, he'll probably negotiate a little more than the minimum. But he doesn't really need to, because isn't it, if you sign him, does that cut into what the Cubs owe him then? So like if a team signs it for $1 million, the Cubs don't have to pay him. They get $1 million saved off of whatever. I don't know how that works.
That's a good question. I don't think so.
It's just a bonus for him. He gets more. That's how it should work. But I have a feeling in baseball that's not how it works. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the shortstops. The 3.5 really good shortstops. I can't put Dansby Swanson in the same. I know he's good. He's pretty good. For what you have to pay him, that's the one guy I would be like, just leave Nico at short, spend that money somewhere else. Do you think they get one of the 4? But when the music ends, do the Cubs have a shortstop to sit on?
I've been going back and forth on this one. I don't know. I think it's going to be one of those, like, who's going to drag out past Cubs convention, and like, is there a guy who needs a landing spot? I think, Trey Turner seems like one of those Dave Dombrowski Philly moves. Like, I know there's stuff like that out there on Twitter, and that's kind of what I had been hearing, like, here and there consistently since the end of the season. I still think Correa, if he wanted X, he didn't get it last year. Yeah. I think he's a great player, but there are, with every player's, a couple scratches like here and there that make you wonder, like, if some team, like if the Twins are like desperate and go insane and like go to like 10 years, or if, it goes past 300 million, like that's not, Jed's just not going to do that. I'm not going to like pretend. But I just think with what we talked about earlier of like the defensive shifts, like how they have to like have some sort of anchor, like I do think they're going to be heavily involved, but like there's going to be no like pat on the back for like trying here. It's like either you do or don't, and they sign him, one of those guys. And I'm with you. Like, I think Swanson, like, I'm not sure how much that's going to like electrify the fan base, but I do think he's a really strong, solid player. And that's where if Jed's going to do one of those big deals, it's going to be with a guy who can, stay in the infield past his shortstop expiration date.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, check out next year's free agent class. It's not like there's like, it's not gonna be 3 years in a row of like a group of awesome shortstops out there. So I definitely think there's like motivation to do it and some internal pressure to do it. It's just that I don't know if they're gonna like blink in the end.
Yeah.
Like, but that's to be determined.
So you think, so at the Cub convention, Tom comes out to his smattering of booze to give his little speech, and then he mentions Marquis and gets booed more. And then he says, but guys, we made a huge signing. We got a shortstop. Everybody, here's A-Ray Andrianza. Come on out. No. Why are you booing? You won't be booing on opening day. Yeah, it might be.
Well, that's always a good, like, that was kind of the way I've been trying to think about this offseason of, like, the Cubs can be in play. Like, obviously they should be in play every year all the time for everything. Like, that's how. But obviously they're not. Like, that's not the world they live in or how they operate their business. But this is one of those off seasons where there's a lot of money on hand. There's, like, you know, almost no building blocks to speak of. You're not blocking anyone. You're not displacing anyone. And, you know, probably like your best player, Nico, has like this fantastic attitude. It's like, I don't care. I want to win. Like, he's a very mature, like, legit leader, and like steady professional presence. And like, he moved to second in a heartbeat if it meant, you know, you're getting an awesome shortstop. And that's the strength of the market. And, like, you know, they have to go as far as they can to see what they can do and what players, you know, are willing to do.
So, you know, it's not that the Bears are involved in this, but it's football. It's like playoff time where you see the graphics where who's got the bye, who's leading what divisions, and then there's the in the hunt over on the side. I just have a feeling Marquis already has a graphic ready where a big player signs and they list the Cubs as like they were in the hunt, and they're just gonna try to take credit for that over and over again. Aaron Judge, we were in the hunt. We didn't actually make him an offer, but we did that. Or we were so close on Carlos Correa, but he's in the hunt, so that'll be fun.
Yeah, in the hunt is a good way to phrase it now, I think, and that's not like something to be celebrating at the Wrigley Wonderland or whatever, Winter Wonderland, but it's a legitimate, accurate portrayal of like where they are in this shortstop pursuit.
So they have that time-lapse video of them setting up all the stuff at Wrigley, and there's that one big tent. Is that the Nick Madrigal petting zoo? Is that what goes on in that little? Oh, look at him! Oh, he just looks like you want to just tousle his hair. You know,
it's like the between two ferns portion of this.
Sorry.
No, the Wrigley's got the. There's like a little train ride around the infield, a couple carny games.
That train ride around the infield
ice skating rink is kind of in right center field. Like, you know, it's not a bad setup.
The train around the infield moves at the exact speed of Albert Almora, so it won't scare the kids. That's fine. So, if the Cubs get one of the shortstops, do they move Nico to second, or do they actually consider maybe making him the short-term solution in center?
I think they would just move him to second. I think that's a lot. I mean,
you're gonna miss out on like 37 Nick Madrigal singles though, if you put Nico there instead.
You know, I did think one of the interesting moments, I think it was in September or maybe late August. September. I mean, they had a Sunday night game against the Giants because I think the Bears played the Niners that day. But like Madrigal was pretty frank. Like he recognized that, like, you know, I need to change a lot of things here. And I thought there was a lot of self-awareness there, and that there was definitely an organizational push to be like, this can't keep happening, and we're not going to like hand you a job next year. So I think like they're probably looking at it as like whatever they get from him next year is a bonus. Like they're not like, if they don't sign a shortstop, I have a hard time thinking to be like, oh well, I mean, we got Madrigal to play second for 150 games next year. Like there was definitely a sense of realism, both from like the player, the manager, and the front office, that like I wouldn't totally write them off just because they have much more realistic expectations for what that could be.
He could play 150 games for him. It takes 3 years for him to play the 150 games because he gets hurt so much. And then I don't know how much of this is true. There was the thought that the Sox got him, and like you need to drive the ball a little. I mean, we can't just have you and he bulked up as much as you can bulk up at 5'5", and that's when the leg injuries started. And kind of the thought that, all right, you got to just change the way you train. Let's get back to, you're just going to have to lean into what you do well, and whatever that is, and trying to add some bulk so you can hit, 3 homers. It probably isn't worth it if it means you're gonna be on the DL 3 times in a season.
Well, that's what I said to Ross. I was like, at this time last year, these exact same questions were about Nico, and he, to his credit, answered the bell. And Ross is like, that's exactly what we've been telling Madrigal, and like those guys have been good friends for a really long time. And to your point, I mean, the Cubs will have a new hitting coach, so I'm sure that'll fix everything.
Wait, what? A new hitting coach? The Cubs?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the Spinal Tap drummer at this point. And I thought it was funny. This time they were just like, just put it in the release. Just throw it in the bottom of the news. Maybe they don't even notice that we're changing again.
I was Googling that because Theo said that Spinal Tap drummer reference, and I was trying to figure out how many hitting coaches ago that he made that comment, but he said it in such an old manner that I have trouble finding the first like reference to it. I want to say it was probably like maybe 2014, like Bill Miller time, but I don't know that for certain. And so
didn't Bill left on his own, right? Want to go to the Cardinals because it'd be closer to where he tore up his knee or something?
I think it was they wanted to get rid of the assistant hitting coach, and Bill Miller was like, "No,
I don't want to do all this stuff."
That he didn't like the idea of them like hand picking the coach he'd be working with, so he just quit, which is kind of admirable.
It's basically what is Star Trek. If the crew members in the red shirts were always they were guaranteed to get shot whenever they got down to whatever planet. The Cubs should just have the hitting coach wear a red jersey just in the dugout. Just lean into it and go, all right, you get the special red shirt because you're going to be gone soon.
What a thankless job. It's no upside.
So one of the free agents that's often connected to the Cubs, I think for 2 reasons. 1, it fills the need. 2, they signed Seiya last year. So people are like, well, the Cubs are just going to, if there's a Japanese guy, the Cubs are going to sign him. Is Kodai Senga. What's the deal with the U in his name? Sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. Koudai or Kodai? I mean, it doesn't make a sound. I'm not putting it in. I'm saving myself a character. I'm leaving the U out.
Yeah, in the Cubs system, there's a U, and then I think it's kind of like if you go back to Ohtani before he came over, there was a couple different variations on, was it on Ohtani? Anyways, yeah, I mean, we'll find out. I think you make a good point about, like, I think sometimes with baseball it's so regional and you only really follow one team, so you think like, oh, my team or the team I cover like always has the inside track for like one kind of somewhat marginal reason. And the Cubs like him, like they've definitely been on him for a while, and they have a really good relationship with Wasserman, and obviously Darvish and Seiya like are good assets to have, like, or references, I should say. But like, I don't know how many times like you can go to that well, or like what a separator really is. Like, if the Cubs offer him the most money, I bet there's probably gonna be a pretty good chance he's gonna sign with the Cubs.
Well, clearly, if they get him to dinner with Tom, he'll seal it. He'll charm pants off him just like he did Seiya. You make a good point, though. I think it's a very fan thing. It's like every player wants to sign with my favorite team. Why wouldn't they? I like them. They should want to play here. It's like sometimes your team really doesn't have a chance because the guy, for whatever reason, doesn't want to go there, or they like someplace else more. But fans are like, no, you should be able to sign this guy and this guy and this guy. Just do what it takes. Sometimes there's nothing to do.
Yeah, I mean, like in 2015, the Cubs had a really compelling case, like coming off the NLCS and, 1908, all that stuff. Right now, like, the Cubs do a very good job with like the amenities and the like creature comforts and stuff like that, but they don't have like a monopoly on that. No. And, it's definitely an attractive destination. Like, their Mesa spring training is exactly at the Scottsdale Tempe border, and Chicago in the summertime is awesome. But like, I don't know, those aren't the only two like good locations in Major League Baseball.
Well, and now everybody talks about, well, they don't want to pay the competitive balance tax, but that's fine. That's your prerogative. But you end up where they are now. There's a tax they'll pay for any of these free agents. It's the loser tax. People can be confident that you're going to turn it around, but at the end of the day, if you're weighing offers between the Dodgers and the Cubs offer is going to have to be for more money than the Dodgers. Or you're just going to the Dodgers.
Yeah.
And you willingly put yourself in that situation, and then you can't shy away from it and be like, well, I don't want to pay that. It's like, well, no, that was the decision you made. You saved money last year. You don't get to save that forever. At some point, you're going to have to pay it. It all will even out in the wash somehow.
Yeah, I mean, they're good at, with pitchers, they have all the bells and whistles for like the pitchers who are into like that type of stuff, and they make very personalized pitches, and like they're really good at articulating or showing a vision for like the off the field life for players. And like from everything I'm told, like they do run things in a really first class manner. Like they almost to the point where I think Theo was just like livid at some of it when they weren't performing towards the end.
Yeah. Like we give you all this stuff. Like, the least you could do is get a hit
like
when
that,
we need it.
That like drove him up a wall. But they have good reputation with stuff like that. Like Wrigley is awesome. The travel's pretty easy. I guess some of that'll change with the schedule changes next year. But like they have a compelling case. It's just, are they willing to, I guess what's their answer to like the Andrew Friedman quote? Like if you're rational about every free agent, you'll finish third for every free agent. And so that's, that's to be determined of like where they're willing to go for which players.
Yeah. And I mean, they may not like it, but fans are going to compare them to the Dodgers forever. For, if nothing else, the idea that the Dodgers run that team the way everybody thinks the Cubs should run their team. I mean, they have a lot of the same advantages that the Cubs do. And the Dodgers are at a point right now where they're like, well, we've shed some salary. We could sign Aaron Judge. We'll just move Mookie to second. And Cub fans are just like rolling their eyes. Like they think they have a possibility. They could add Aaron Judge to that team. And we're sitting over here going, well, I don't know. We can't go more than 6 years on a shortstop because he might not be worth it at the end. It's like, yeah, well, if you sign a free agent, chances are he's not going to be worth it at the end. That's just how it's going to work out. You just hope that he's worth it at the beginning and that you capitalize on it.
Yeah, I mean, all their rhetoric after winning the World Series was, how they wanted to be this like iconic global brand, and we want to do the, it wasn't, winning one World Series. It was this endless runway of competitiveness, and, they will point to things like their second half and their vibes and all the stuff they have going for them, and then it's like, okay, well, you're gonna have to like put some money behind that. Like if that's what you really believe, then sign some guys,
I mean, the frustrating thing for me was one of the reasons, I mean, the 2016 team was a great team. One of the reasons it was so good was it had a lot of depth. They had guys that bench guys were good players. They had you know, they had 2 shortstops who played, all the time. They had, and the first thing they started to do was they just kind of, that's where they let it slip because they didn't want the payroll to keep going up. And all of a sudden the bullpen's not as deep, the bench isn't as deep. And it's like, that's the easy stuff, right? That's the stuff that's all that takes is a little extra money, and you can address that. And it was clear that they had taken that from Theo and basically said, you don't really need to spend that much. I mean, you can't put together a winning roster with $208 million. That's all we're going to give. It's for 220, I can probably have a much better team. 208 is probably good enough. And there's lots of people who will sit and they had a top 3 payroll. It's like, I don't care if their payroll is top. I don't care what their payroll is. I'm a fan. I want to know what the roster looks like. That's the fact that we. You have to be like an amateur economist to truly understand your sport. It's like, maybe it's not worth trying to understand this. I don't care what your payroll is. When I go to a movie, I don't care how much you pay the actors. I just want to watch the movie. It should be the same thing with sports, but it's not. And owners have used that to their advantage, where fans are like, it's nothing better than a fan they shouldn't have to spend that much. It's like, they're billionaires. They know it's expensive to run a team when they bought it. You don't let them off the hook. I don't quite understand that.
Yeah, and it's even not that expensive when you look at how many built-in revenue sources they have guaranteed, the soaring franchise valuations, the cachet it brings to you in the other dealings in your portfolio. And I don't think they're to your point, ownership is just straight cheap.
No,
it's just that because there are things that they do, whether it's setting aside the layoffs during the pandemic was just inexcusable. That really chipped away at the credibility. But in terms of Wrigley Field, spring training, how players are treated, the investments that they've made around the baseball team that are geared towards winning are substantial, and their payroll was high during that time. It was just an unwillingness or an inability to look at that moment of they thought they had the Golden State Warriors, this young charismatic team that kind of crossed over different generations, and they played with a lot of style, and they didn't go all out. I think another Andrew Friedman quote was we want to be pigs about this or something like that after they won a World Series. And it wasn't that. It was pretty measured. And, even when they wound up with that top payroll in 2019, it was you're only signing Kimbrel once Zobrist goes off the books for a little bit. And it's would Kimbrel, if he had a full spring training, would he have blown that, those poom games, as Madden, called them, against the Cardinals? It's there was a lot of patchwork, and part of that goes back to Theo and Jed too. You had to pick up Cole Hamels' option because there was just no one else coming, and that was $20 million for an all-star pitcher, but that's what the moment called for. And that's where I go back and forth, and I do think there's a little more self-awareness now of they slightly lowered ticket prices. They do realize that it's a way more competitive marketplace. They see people dropping off the season ticket list. But they also know they're the Cubs, and that history's shown millions of people will show up to Wrigley Field no matter what,
I think the big blinking red light, the warning light that it went off for all of us was around the Cole Hamels thing, because that was after the offseason before they signed Darvish, and Theo bragged that he didn't have to spend as much as he thought, and they were going to have money to spend next year. And then all of a sudden they had to not exercise Drew Smyly's option, so they could afford
to trade him.
So they could. Oh, that's right. They traded him, so they could afford Cole Hamels. And you went, there's something very wrong here. And I also think it would be easier for Cub fans to have swallowed the teardown had we felt like they'd really gone for it in 18 and 19 and 21. I don't know what you're going to do about 20 because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
It'd be like, oh, well, they tried it all. They loaded up and they went after it, and now it's time to do a reset. When they didn't, they started like pulling back a little bit in 18 and 19 instead of pushing forward. And the natural raises that young players get as they get older, they're like, well, look at our payroll. It's like, yeah, well, you knew that was going to go up. You're supposed to be adding on top of that. And I think that's the big frustration that they didn't expect, I think, was that fans would be like, I think they thought everybody would be like, well, this is a brilliant idea to rebuild. The idea might be fine, but you weren't going as hard as you could. You weren't trying as much as you could to win those years. You were just hoping that what you had was good enough. And as a fan now, my fear is with the extra wild card that the Cubs we don't have to build a 95 win team. We could build an 85 win team. So we don't need to spend what we think it'll take to be 95 wins. You just got to get in the playoffs and look at the Phillies. And it's like, well, I think you're learning the wrong lesson from the Phillies, because the Phillies have Bryce Harper and they had Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler, and you don't have any of that. So if you take an 83 win team with the talent you got into the playoffs, you're going to be there for 2 days. And then that's going to be it. I think they're comfortable, I think, just selling the idea of contention to fans, not the idea of trying to actually win a championship. They just kind of hope that the residue of getting in the playoffs might be that you'll win one.
Yeah, it is weird looking back at that period of how complex some of this stuff is. Of like, if you look at, the beginning of the Theo era there, they were so rigid and conservative with how they looked at pitching, and they just wasted multiple drafts on pitching. And that's something you don't see until 18, 19. And like the 2017 draft, I think something like their top 7 picks have all reached the majors, and like they're not all huge impact guys, but you see that, and Nico and Brennan, like they do have like some like talent coming. And then you see the pandemic. Like without the pandemic, I think Javi's well on his way into a long-term deal with the Cubs. And it's weird how they kind of disengaged with Willson, because I do think if you have like Javi and Willson, or if you had signed Rizzo, which in retrospect was like a pretty fair deal. Like he was extended, you know what I mean? Like there's all these like layers to it. And it's just kind of really staggering to wrap your mind around, like how many things kind of broke down after the World Series. And even though those events took place over a really long period of time.
Well, I want to be fair to them. They did extend David Bodie. They got him locked up for like the next 11 years, $3 million a year. That's good. So can't say they didn't lock some of the stars up. They got him. What do we think? What do we think they can get out of Kyle Hendricks? This is his last year, right? Is this the last year?
Yeah, and then there's a club option after that. He's supposed to start throwing in early December, and I think his shoulder issue was not minor, but something that he could have pitched through if the Cubs were like a good team. And I think the idea now is they basically wanted to create an off season during the season, so you just have more time to really like ramp up and do some like drive line style techniques. Now I don't know if it's like physically going to a drive line place, but just kind of like working with some of those ideas to try like boost some velocity. And also just, he's older now. He's not like straight out old, but like, to get his mechanics in perfect sync, like takes a level of athleticism that maybe he just through no fault of his own, like had kind of slipped in. And so I think they're looking at what they get from him as a bonus. Like they're not going to like, oh, we can't sign pitcher X because we have Kyle Hendricks coming back. But like, if he could get just like a little bit more velocity, and as you stated at the top of this, the Cubs really like trumpeting their pitch lab developments. Like if you could just get a little bit more out of Kyle and maybe like, get him feeling a little more athletic, something that just like couldn't happen if he's making 30 starts a year. And can you bring him back as a guy who maybe makes 20 starts with a little more velo, but is just in better shape physically, or feels less worn down to like execute all the timing components of his delivery. Like I think that's worth pursuing, and Kyle is someone that like you would bet on. Just a great dude, like a really hard worker, a good guy to have around to like help teach, like the most approachable person ever in a clubhouse. So they're kind of in wait and see mode. It was supposed to be around the start of the winter meetings is when that throwing program was supposed to start up again. So
yeah, I mean, I think if you had told us that the last remaining World Series player would be Kyle Hendricks, you'd be like, well, he must turn into right-handed Jamie Moyer, and he's pitching into his late 40s. It's like, no, he's 6 years, they're all just going to be gone.
Yeah, it's hard to go from, I think someone put it to me like Bartolo Colon went from like 100 to 88 and could still get guys out, but Kyle's starting at like 88, 87. Like there's just not much margin for error.
Yeah. You have to literally like pitch below like the batting practice speed to really throw people off that much.
Yeah, if he could somehow get a little more velocity and like separate some of those pitches a little more, and I think he probably fell into some kind of predictable patterns. But yeah, it'd definitely be interesting to see how he comes back and what he can do. I think it would be a good story if he does.
So Jed said they're open to signing Nico or Ian Happ to contract extensions. I'm a little more excited about one than the other. What does an Ian Happ contract extension look like? I mean, he's certainly not a bad player, but he's a left fielder. We know he's a Gold Glove left fielder now. I just feel like you got to get more out of left field than that. And I don't know how hard they shopped him at the deadline, but I think the feedback they got from the league was, no, we're good. He's not much of an upgrade over what we've already got.
Yeah, I mean, I think that also could be, the Cubs overvaluing their own players, but I don't know. He's an above average major league player who can switch hit, and who I think has shown a lot of like growth and awareness of where he's at in his career. And I don't know how much the Cubs value this. They probably don't, but like, he's definitely someone who like immediately gravitated toward like John Lester and Kyle Schwarber and like kind of hung out with those guys a lot and definitely learned a lot from them about how you should carry yourself and kind of like think about the game and prepare. Like, I do think there's some intangible value in that. And I also think he's a pretty independent thinker. So like the Cubs are not going to like shove some team friendly deal in his face while he's serving on the MLBPA executive committee. I think that could be an issue, but I think, I don't know, see what Andrew Benintendi gets this offseason, because they're not like exactly the same players, but that was a player the Cubs looked at. I think the Red Sox drafted him like 2 spots before, a left fielder who I guess he doesn't have the power that Ian does, but kind of not a prototypical like left field slugger, and he'll probably get a pretty good deal. I mean, the Cubs gave Seiya $85 million guaranteed before he took an at-bat in the majors, and the going rate for an above average competent major league player who can switch hit is probably going to be on an annual basis close to that. And I did think the consistency he showed this year was noteworthy, and But yeah, I just think it's hard to get those deals done when you're that close to free agency.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, unless you're like I mean, they didn't get it done with Judge and the Yankees, but unless you're some sort of like franchise player who like can't stand the idea of leaving and they give you like a free agent deal right then, like that usually doesn't happen. Yeah. Nico is a lot more likely to get done.
Yeah, I think if I was Happ and they offered me something attractive last season, during the season, I was far more open. Now you're like, I'm just a year away. I want to go see what you get that close to it. You really want to go see what else you can get instead of just taking your team's word for this is what you're worth.
Yeah, I mean, he'll have a good. I mean, he's a really sharp guy, and like he would have a pretty good idea of what his value would be, and I think understands the dimensions of free agency because it's not always what you think it's going to be. Like no one thought Jake Arrieta would be signing in the middle of March, like with the Phillies on a 3-year deal. I think like, you know, it's usually a risk worth taking. But there are times where you're trying to play catch up, like with Rizzo's deal. Like he's in a great spot, super happy, might win another ring, gets to play in New York, like with, family and, friends there, and like live in the, see him and Aaron Judge, like pounding beers at Ranger games at Madison Square Garden. Like it's a good play, but free agents, you get tagged with a qualifying offer. Like there's a lot of factors.
Yeah. So there's some talk that the Astros, who apparently almost traded for Willson at the deadline, and whether or not Dusty said, I got my dudes, I don't need that dude. But then there's the talk that, well, if they get him, he'll play left field some, and he'll DH some, and then he'll just catch a little bit. And it's like, to me, the value for Willson is you get a catcher who can hit better than most catchers. But over the last 3 years, he's slashed 241, 346, 444. I'm not paying a lot of money to put that in left field and we've seen him play the outfield. It can be an adventure. I can't imagine that's the smart move for Willson to go become a utility player in Houston, even though you're on a much better team. Somebody, I think, is going to want him to is going to sign him to be a catcher, and he's going to end up with a better deal because of that, wouldn't he?
Yeah, I was never able to get like a straight answer out of Willson, or like the chance to like ask him just directly about that, because by September he was kind of he was injured and did not want to talk while he was on the injured list. But like, how much pride do you take in catching, and like how important is that to you? And maybe it's just the money, like, show your value with what your contract is, and maybe there's like a number that he's like, okay, I don't really need to catch that much anyways. But I do think you're right in that's where the value is of like, okay, you have him DH. Maybe in year 2 or 3 of that contract, he could play a little first or left field. Like, I do think he could do that. And it's really interesting to me of like, this campaign against Wilson's catching. Like, I think clearly he's not like number one on the metrics, on framing. I do think there are times probably where he carries his offense over to his defense, if he's frustrated. He is like a high energy, emotional person, and maybe that's not what certain pitchers want. But like, I don't know. John Lester had a pretty specific way about how he wanted things done, and Willson pretty seamlessly replaced Ross as a personal catcher. I think he's worked with, like, I know we kind of were just ripping on the Cubs pitching, but I mean, he's caught Darvish, Lackey, Lester, Cole Hamels, I mean, Kimbrel, Aroldis Chapman, Wade Davis. Like, he's worked with a really veteran, accomplished pitching staff and what is a pretty sophisticated game planning system. And, I think it just comes down to like, catcher is this one weird area where teams like value those soft factors because they don't cost a lot of money. And I would be interested to see like how Willson if there's a way, maybe he improves with like a long-term deal and like the security. I mean, this guy who's worked on a year-to-year basis since like what, 2009 or 2008, whenever he first signed with the Cubs, like 14, 15 years of 1-year deals.
Yeah, he's this generation's Mark Grace.
And like, all these trade rumors and questions about this and that. So, I think ultimately he'll have a pretty good market. Ken reported he's supposed to meet with the Astros. And I also think it's kind of crazy. He works for the Cubs like 14, 15 years and he doesn't get truly unrestricted free agency. There's a qualifying offer attached to that. Like that was it's like you don't get traded at the deadline and they don't come up with a deal to get rid of the qualifying offer in exchange for an international draft. It's just, and Dusty's celebrating the World Series and gives an unrecord quote of like, yeah, I didn't want Willson. He's a great player, but like, it's a lot.
Yep.
For a guy who really, I mean, I think he signed for 40,000 or something like that out of Venezuela, like or 100,000, whatever it was. I think it was 100,000. Just absolutely maximized his entire time with the Cubs, and it'd be interesting to see the smile on his face when he signs somewhere else.
So, they have to get another catcher, right?
Yeah.
They can't go into the. They don't think Yan Gomes is like the everyday starter. No. It's like Yan
Gomes will catch, I don't know, 70, 80 games. It'll be a timeshare, like a co-starter type thing. And that's where they could, I don't know, you add up a lot of pieces like that. I think it could make a difference. They just have to go out and like do it. Because we've seen that over the course of a long year. Like Cubs are running out some pretty, threadbare teams. Yeah. Even when they were winning like 90 games, like their depth wasn't super great. They were like pretty top heavy. You didn't like Mike Freeman playing shortstop in a pennant race? You didn't think that was a thing to bank on? We got Nico off the couch. That was a good story. That was a good thing to write about. On his parents' couch. Then he hit a homer and didn't hit another one for like 3 years. So at catcher, would they try to trade for a guy like Sean Murphy or Danny Jansen, or are they looking at just like another 2 backups make 1 starter? I'm sure they'll look into trading, but just knowing how this front office works, I think they're not the most like easy team to trade with, particularly like Toronto is probably even more process oriented than like the Cubs are. Plus it's only money. It's like, why not just, get Christian Vasquez. I think the Cardinals are probably going to be all over him, but the Omar Narvaez types, like solid players, if you put them in the right role, like I think over the course of a year makes a difference. What was the year when Willson, they used like 9 backup catchers? Was that 21? Yeah, it was 8 or 9 backup catchers. Yeah. Like absurd. Until they brought back Robinson Chirinos 20 years after they drafted him. That's right. And then they finally were able to. He finished the season. They didn't need to go find more backup catchers. They had him. Yikes. Because that's the thing that would confuse me about the whole Willson thing, is if you just let Willson go and you collect your wonderful sandwich pick as a result of some other team signing him, but then you have to trade for a catcher, the prospect perverts are going to be very upset that you had to give away, because all those guys are going to be great, when you could have simply spent money, which you do have, and then kept those guys. That's and I think you talked a little bit about the system, and the reason that I make fun of the so-called prospects, the fans really who follow the prospect experts and are like, oh, this guy's going to be great, is the Cubs. It seems like the Cubs have a lot of guys in the system who have a potential to play in the big leagues at some level, but this is not like a star-studded group of prospects where you're going to bring up, and I think part of it, I'm sure they got spoiled from, you bring up Javi and then Chris Bryant and then Kyle Schwarber, and you think, well, that stuff just happens all the time. It's like, well, most of those guys are just okay.
And so some of these guys because a guy's dominating at, double A, you can't just take those numbers and extrapolate them to Wrigley. And you're like, look, I told you he was going to be a star. It's like, they're prospects for a reason. They might be good. And it's a pretty small percentage that ever really pan out.
I mean, and this is obviously oversimplifying, but 2015, the Cubs have the number one farm system in the game. The majority of those players don't pan out, particularly on the pitching side. They win the World Series in 2016. Then by 2018, everyone's like sick of watching them to the point where Theo goes, "Our offense broke," in his one-man show press conference. And then they kept running it back out there, and people were just, tired of watching that team, that offense, try to click. So I think you're right in that. They probably look at it. I think it's Fangraphs that does like the future value. Like if you add up all these players, what they're projected for, and the Cubs are pretty high. Like they value the Cubs more highly because they have like competent major league talent coming. But that doesn't mean they have any stars. And I do think on the pitching side, it's a good sign that it used to just be they would talk about Brilliant Marquez, and then you'd kind of get awkward silence on the other end of the line. And now they do have a lot of arms, and you need those because some of them are going to get injured, or what's your line, like catch Tommy John disease or whatever. And
the scourge of baseball, Tommy John disease.
I mean, by all accounts, Pete Crow Armstrong is legit. And that's not the Cubs saying it. That's like, if you look at this guy's life, like, he played for Team USA like 4 or 5 times. He was a first-round pick by the Mets after not even having a high school senior season. And, he was injured and then just like kills it this year. Like, that would be putting your faith not in the Cubs. That would just putting your faith in like someone who's been like a prodigy growing up in Southern California, more than any sort of like new wrinkle in the Cubs player development system. It's like, this guy's been a star like everywhere he's been, except for that one year he was injured with the Mets and they traded him for 2 months of Javi.
And it scared them away from trading with the Cubs last time. Well, we might do that again. It's like, with PCA, he has one particular skill that we know translates. If you're a really good defensive center fielder in the minor leagues, we will be a really good defensive center fielder in the big leagues. So the chances that he will flop are far less than the other guys, because even if he's just an okay hitter, he's going to be an elite defensive center fielder. Like, there's something you can hang your hat on with him that you can't with other prospects. It was disappointing for everybody, Brendan Davis most of all, that he got hurt and had to have surgery, even though it wasn't structural. There's just a big wad. We just fought a wad of blood vessels in his back. Took care of that. It's fine. Because the Cub fans, I think, needed somebody to graduate from that farm system last year and at least play. And they really didn't. They got some pitchers, but they didn't get anybody else. And so that's another. I mean, that delays it to the point where even if he's fully healthy this year, he's not going to Wrigley in April. I mean, he becomes a mid-season call-up. He's going to need at bats somewhere. That just further complicates it. It creates yet another hole where maybe you could have thought, you know what, we can get by with him in center for a while, and now you can't look at it that way. You have to go get a center fielder, at least on the short term. So that's another thing that happens to prospects. Sometimes they get hurt.
Yeah.
So the winter meetings are next week. Are you going? Do you get to go to the winter meetings? Or are you going to cover them from afar? San Diego.
I will be standing in a hotel lobby for hours on end. So maybe you'll see me in the background of the MLB Network shots when
I love that. I love background shots. I love to see like who's chatting
just
with
lots
who in the
of
background.
people like this looking at their phones.
Yeah. Don't look at your phone and back up and end up in a fountain, because that'll get gift. See Patrick's legs going up over his head in a big splash.
I remember that. If my memory serves correctly, that happened. Then I bumped into Dale Swaim, me and another writer. I think that was the Dallas winter meetings, but that was an amazing video shot of that. So good.
So now does Boris do another like 40 minutes in the lobby, or does he gets that out of the way at the general manager's meetings? He uses up all of his puns and then he's just working, or will he do that again in San Diego?
No, he traditionally does it at the GM and the winter meetings.
Yeah. Well, I think he'd do it this time because this is the first winter meetings in
since
while.
2019.
Yeah, so he's got lots of material saved up.
Well, he did in 2020 he did one on Zoom. Like the Boris Corp sent out an email with like a link and whatever, and did it all over Zoom, which is not as fun, but it was easier to record than having 100 people around him. So he's got a lot of, obviously he's once again has a ton of the big guys up top, so like it kind of goes through him in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and he can control how the market breaks that way too. Like if he's got a bunch of guys, he traditionally likes to hold the big guys till the end. But since he's got several of them this year, he may want to he can kind of start and finish the market. He can set it, and then at the end so he's got all kinds of clout. Well, I hope while you're out there, there's some news that you actually, the Cubs actually do something, if only to make your life easier, so you have things to write about other than they're in the hunt on all these guys.
I'll definitely use in the hunt at some point. That'll be a good catchphrase.
All right. Well, thank you, Patrick.
Many of us have herpes.